The scent of freshly brewed coffee usually filled our kitchen with a comforting warmth, a familiar embrace that signaled the start of a new day. But this morning, it was overshadowed by a different aroma, the acrid tang of fear, thick and suffocating, clinging to every surface. My father, Robert Jenkins, a man whose shoulders had always seemed broad enough to carry the weight of the world, sat at the head of the antique oak table, his posture unusually rigid. His usually kind eyes, typically crinkling at the corners with a gentle humor, were narrowed, fixed on a single sheet of paper clutched tightly in his trembling hand. It wasn't a business report, nor a bill, nor any of the mundane documents that usually occupied his attention. This was different. This was an anonymous letter. I was Clara Jenkins, his only daughter, and for the past 6 months I had been living under a self-imposed shroud of anxiety, a constant low hum of dread that vibrated beneath my skin. I knew, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this letter was about me. The silence in the room was deafening, punctuated only by the rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, each second stretching into an eternity. My mother, Sarah, usually a whirlwind of morning energy, stood frozen by the counter, a half-filled coffee mug forgotten in her hand, her gaze darting nervously between my father and me. She sensed it too, the unspoken tension, the impending storm. My own heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence, so loud I was sure everyone could hear its frantic rhythm, a testament to my rising panic. My palms were slick with sweat, and a cold knot tightened in my stomach. I had known this day might come, had lived in constant fear of it, but knowing didn't lessen the impact. It only amplified the terror. Finally, my father cleared his throat, a dry, rasping sound that seemed to scrape against the silence. He unfolded the letter slowly, deliberately, as if prolonging the agony, each crease a testament to the venom it contained. His eyes scanned the neatly typed lines, and with each passing second, the color drained from his face, leaving it a ghostly white. A muscle twitched in his jaw, a telltale sign of his mounting distress. He took a shaky breath, then began to read aloud, his voice low and strained, barely above a whisper. Yet each word landed like a hammer blow, echoing in the cavernous silence of the kitchen. To Robert Jenkins Esquire, he began, his voice trembling slightly. You pride yourself on your integrity, your unwavering trust in those closest to you. But perhaps you should look closer, Mr. Jenkins. Perhaps you should examine the snake you've nurtured in your own nest. Your daughter, Clara, the one you hold so dear, is not who you think she is. She is a saboteur, a traitor, systematically undermining your legacy for her own selfish gain. She has been leaking sensitive company data, manipulating financial records, and actively working to discredit your most loyal partners. She is the reason your recent merger talks failed. She is the reason your reputation is slowly eroding. She is a cancer within your organization, and if you don't cut her out, she will destroy everything you've built. Don't believe me? Look at the missing client files from the Peterson account. Check the discrepancies in the Q3 earnings report. Ask yourself why your most promising new product line suddenly hit a wall. The truth is staring you in the face, Mr. Jenkins. Your own daughter is your undoing. A concerned party. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, like a shroud. Saboteur, traitor, undermining your legacy. Each accusation was a poisoned dart, striking deep, leaving a burning trail of shame and disbelief. My mother let out a small, choked sob, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror as she stared at me, a silent question screaming in their depths, "Is this true?" My own breath caught in my throat, a silent scream trapped behind my lips, unable to escape. My vision blurred, the kitchen spinning around me, threatening to swallow me whole. I wanted to deny it, to scream that it was all a lie, a cruel fabrication. But I couldn't, because, in a twisted, horrifying way, some of it was true. Not the part about being a saboteur or a traitor, not the part about selfish gain, but the actions, the missing files, the discrepancies, the product line. I had done those things, but not for the reasons the letter implied. Never for those reasons. My father finished reading, the paper rustling as his hand shook. He slowly lowered the letter, his gaze, once filled with a profound sadness, now hardened, fixed on me. The silence stretched again, thick with unspoken accusations, with the weight of his disappointment. I braced myself for the explosion, for the fury, for the crushing condemnation I knew was coming. I deserved it, didn't I? For the deception, for the secrecy, for putting him in this position. I had risked everything, and now it was all crashing down. I squeezed my eyes shut, preparing for the inevitable. Then his voice, low and filled with a profound weariness, cut through the silence. "Clara," he said, his tone devoid of the anger I expected, replaced by something far more unsettling. "I can't believe you did this." The words were a knife twisting in my gut, confirming my worst fears. He believed it. He believed the letter. He believed I was a traitor. My eyes snapped open, tears blurring my vision, but I forced myself to look at him, to face the judgment. His face was etched with pain, but not just pain. There was something else there, something I couldn't quite decipher, a flicker of something unexpected. And then he said it. The words that completely blindsided me, that shattered my carefully constructed expectations, that turned my world on its axis. "I can't believe you did this." Without telling me. The air in the kitchen, already thick with tension, suddenly crackled with an entirely new kind of energy. His words, "I can't believe you did this," without telling me, hung in the air, a bewildering paradox that defied everything I had braced myself for. It wasn't the furious condemnation, the crushing disappointment, the outright disbelief in my character that I had anticipated. Instead, it was a question, an almost bewildered plea for understanding, tinged with a profound sense of hurt, not about what I had done, but about why I had kept him in the dark. My mother, who had been on the verge of tears, looked up, her expression mirroring my own confusion. The anonymous letter, still clutched in my father's hand, suddenly seemed less like a weapon and more like a catalyst, forcing a truth into the open that I had desperately tried to bury. My mind raced, trying to process his unexpected reaction. He wasn't accusing me of malice, but of secrecy. This changed everything. It meant he didn't believe the core accusation of betrayal, but rather saw my actions as a misguided attempt to handle something alone. The relief that washed over me was so profound, it almost buckled my knees. But it was quickly followed by a fresh wave of anxiety. Now, I had to explain. And the truth, while absolving me of treachery, was still incredibly complex, dangerous, and deeply unsettling. "Dad," I started, my voice hoarse, my throat tight with emotion. It's not what it seems. The letter, it's from him, from Richard Thorne." The name hung in the air like a curse. Richard was my father's longtime business partner, his closest confidant, a man who had been like an uncle to me since childhood. He was charming, charismatic, and utterly ruthless. For years I had admired his sharp business acumen, his ability to navigate the cutthroat world of corporate finance. But 6 months ago, I had stumbled upon something that shattered that admiration and revealed a darkness I never imagined. It started innocently enough. I was working late at the office, putting the finishing touches on a presentation, when I noticed a strange discrepancy in the Peterson account files. A series of large, unexplained transfers to an offshore shell company. My father had always preached transparency and ethical conduct, so I knew this wasn't his doing. My curiosity piqued. I started digging. What I found sent a cold shiver down my spine. Richard wasn't just making questionable transfers. He was systematically siphoning funds from the company, diverting profits, and inflating expenses to create a massive slush fund. He was using our company, Jenkins and Thorne Enterprises, as a front for a vast money laundering operation, funneling illicit funds for a shadowy international crime syndicate. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My father, the man who had built his business on integrity and trust, was unknowingly complicit in a criminal enterprise. Richard was not just stealing from us. He was putting my father, and by extension our entire family, in grave legal danger. If this came out, my father could lose everything: his business, his reputation, his freedom. I couldn't go to my father directly. Richard was too cunning, too deeply entrenched. He controlled the financial records, the legal documents, the very narrative of the company. Any direct accusation without irrefutable proof would be easily dismissed, and I would be branded as paranoid, or worse, a saboteur myself. I knew Richard had eyes and ears everywhere, a network of loyalists he had cultivated over years. I had to be careful, meticulous, and utterly silent. So I started my own covert investigation. Every late night at the office wasn't about extra work. It was about meticulously copying files, cross-referencing bank statements, tracing the labyrinthine flow of money through shell corporations. The missing client files from the Peterson account weren't missing. I had taken them, securing them as evidence. The discrepancies in the Q3 earnings report weren't my manipulation. They were Richard's, and I had highlighted them, subtly, hoping to draw attention to them without revealing my hand too soon. The new product line hitting a wall? That was me, deliberately slowing down its progress. I had discovered that Richard planned to use the product's launch to push through a series of fraudulent contracts with his criminal associates, legitimizing their dirty money through our company's legitimate channels. By delaying the launch, I was buying time, hoping to gather enough evidence to expose him before he could execute his plan. It was a terrifying tightrope walk. Every day I lived in fear of being discovered, of my actions being misinterpreted, of Richard realizing I was on to him. I knew the risks. I knew I was playing a dangerous game, one that could cost me everything. But the alternative, letting my father walk blindly into a legal and financial abyss, was unthinkable. I had to protect him, even if it meant becoming the villain in his eyes, even if it meant sacrificing my own reputation. I had planned to gather all the evidence, present it to him in a way that was undeniable, and then go to the authorities. But Richard, it seemed, had grown suspicious. He must have noticed my subtle interference, the delays, the questions I sometimes posed that were just a little too pointed. He had decided to strike first, to discredit me, to turn my father against me before I could expose him. The anonymous letter was his preemptive strike, a desperate attempt to frame me and protect his criminal enterprise. Richard? My father's voice was barely a whisper, his face now a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. Are you saying Richard is behind this? He looked at the letter again, then at me, a new light entering his eyes. And the accusations, the missing files, the discrepancies, you did those things? To expose him? I nodded, tears finally streaming down my face, a torrent of relief and fear. Yes, Dad, I had to. He's been using the company for money laundering. He's involved with very dangerous people. I couldn't tell you because I knew he had eyes everywhere. I was trying to gather enough proof to protect you, to expose him without putting you in immediate danger. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth again, but this time it was out of pure horror, not accusation. My father's expression shifted, the weariness replaced by a steely resolve, a familiar glint of determination I hadn't seen in years. He looked at the anonymous letter, then crumpled it in his hand, his grip firm. I can't believe you did this without telling me, he repeated, but this time the words were imbued with a different meaning entirely, not disappointment, but a profound, almost overwhelming sense of pride. You risked everything, Clara, to protect me, to protect our family. You were so brave. The crumpled anonymous letter lay discarded on the oak table, a testament to a betrayal far deeper than its words implied. My father's gaze, once filled with a bewildered sadness, now burned with a fierce, protective intensity. His initial shock at my confession quickly morphed into a cold, calculated fury directed squarely at Richard. Thorne. My mother, still reeling from the revelation, sank into a chair, her face pale, but her eyes, too, held a newfound understanding, a silent apology for her earlier doubt. The air in the kitchen, once heavy with fear, was now charged with a different kind of energy, determination, resolve, and a quiet simmering rage. Money laundering? My father repeated, the words tasting foreign and bitter on his tongue. With Richard? All this time? I trusted him like a brother. His voice was low, dangerous, a rumble of thunder before a storm. Tell me everything. Clara. Every detail, every piece of proof you've gathered. And so, I did. For the next hour, I laid bare the intricate web of Richard's deception. I described the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the falsified invoices, the manipulated financial reports. I explained how he had been using the Peterson account as a primary conduit, funneling millions through our legitimate business. I detailed his plan to use the new product line launch to push through fraudulent contracts, legitimizing even more illicit funds. I showed him the encrypted messages I'd managed to intercept, the coded conversations that hinted at the shadowy figures Richard was truly working for. My father listened intently, his expression grim, occasionally interjecting with sharp, incisive questions that showed his deep understanding of the business and how meticulously Richard had covered his tracks. He was piecing together the puzzle, seeing the subtle signs he had missed, the small anomalies that, in hindsight, screamed of foul play. The Q3 earnings report, he murmured, tapping his finger on the table. I remember thinking the numbers for the new product line seemed off, too slow considering the market research. I questioned Richard, and he dismissed it as initial market resistance. He even suggested we cut your budget for it, Clara, saying you weren't aggressive enough in your strategy. A wave of understanding washed over his face. He was trying to isolate you, wasn't he? To make your actions look like incompetence, to remove you from the project. Yes, Dad, I confirmed, a fresh wave of tears stinging my eyes. He knew I was onto something. He just didn't know how much. My father stood up, walking to the window, his back to us. He stood there for a long moment, staring out at the familiar backyard, the one he had worked so hard to provide for us. I could almost feel the weight of his thoughts, the crushing burden of betrayal. When he turned back, his eyes were clear, hardened steel. We go to the authorities, he stated, his voice firm, leaving no room for debate. But we do it carefully. Richard is dangerous, you said, and he has powerful connections. He does, Dad. That's why I couldn't tell you. I needed to build an ironclad case, something they couldn't dismiss, something that would protect you from any blowback. And you did, he said, a proud, almost reverent look in his eyes. You did it all by yourself, my brave girl. He walked over to me, pulling me into a tight embrace. It was a hug filled with a love so profound, so unconditional, that it washed away months of fear, doubt, and self-reproach. I'm so sorry I didn't see it sooner, Clara. I'm so sorry you had to carry this burden alone. I just wanted to protect you, Dad, I whispered into his shoulder, tears soaking his shirt. And you did, he repeated, pulling back slightly to look into my eyes. You saved me, Clara. You saved our family. And you saved our company from being tainted by his corruption. Over. The next few weeks we worked in secret, a clandestine operation within our own home. My father, with his vast knowledge of the company's inner workings, helped me refine the evidence, identifying key documents, cross-referencing dates, and building an irrefutable timeline of Richard's illicit activities. My mother, though not directly involved in the evidence gathering, provided invaluable emotional support, a quiet strength that anchored us through the stressful days and sleepless nights. We consulted with a trusted, discreet lawyer, a family friend who specialized in corporate fraud, who confirmed the gravity of Richard's crimes and the meticulousness of my investigation. The day we finally presented our case to the FBI was a blur of legal jargon, financial statements, and hushed conversations. The agents, initially skeptical of an anonymous letter and a daughter's accusations against a respected business partner, grew increasingly grim as they reviewed the mountain of evidence we had compiled. By the end of the day, they were convinced. Richard Thorne was a major player in a sophisticated international money laundering scheme, and Jenkins and Thorne Enterprises was his unwitting conduit. The arrest happened swiftly, quietly, a few days later. Richard was apprehended at his home, taken into custody without incident. The news exploded, a scandal that rocked the local business community and made national headlines. The initial reports, fueled by the anonymous letter, hinted at internal sabotage, but as the FBI's investigation unfolded, the truth began to emerge. Clara Jenkins, the quiet daughter, was hailed as a hero, a whistleblower who had risked everything to expose a vast criminal enterprise and save her father's legacy. The aftermath was chaotic. Our company faced intense scrutiny, but my father's reputation, thanks to my timely intervention and the irrefutable evidence, remained intact. He was seen as a victim, a man betrayed by his closest friend, but ultimately a man of integrity. The company underwent a massive restructuring, severing all ties with Richard's network, and slowly, painstakingly, began to rebuild. Life slowly returned to a new normal. The fear was gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace and an even deeper bond within our family. My father, now more trusting than ever, made me his official partner, not just in name, but in every sense of the word. He valued my sharp eye, my meticulous nature, and most importantly, my unwavering loyalty. One evening, months later, as we sat in the kitchen, the comforting scent of coffee once again filling the air, my father looked at me, a gentle smile on his face. "You know, Clara," he said, "that anonymous letter was the worst thing that ever happened to me, and also the best." I smiled back, understanding. "I can't believe you did this, Dad," I thought, remembering his words, but now they were filled with a different kind of meaning. Not disbelief in my actions, but in the incredible strength of his trust, the unwavering belief he had in me, even when the world tried to tell him otherwise. He had been surprised by my secret, but I had been even more surprised by his unwavering faith. And that, I realized, was the greatest gift of all.